Ukrainian forces are advancing in the south and achieving significant successes in the east. Ukrainian forces continue their offensive in the Zaporizhzhia region and achieve partial success there. In addition, the armed forces of Ukraine is conducting attacks against the invaders in the Luhansk region. The Ukrainian Defense Forces of the Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Andriy Kovalev, continues to conduct offensive operations in the directions of Melitopol, Berdyansk, and Mariupol. Mariupol in southeastern Ukraine was shaken by a new explosion as it became one of the most heavily bombarded cities since the beginning of the war. Last morning, another powerful explosion shook the occupied Mariupol. The attack is widely discussed by locals as a result of the explosions. Senior officers of the Russian armed forces were eliminated in Mariupol. There is a high probability that the attack was made with Storm Shadow. The information was also confirmed by Peter Andreaschenko, advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, with reference to the partisan movement Mariupol Opposition. He stated that the Russian army was blown up in a private house in the Primorsky district of the city not far from the port. Local residents have publicly reported that ambulances of firefighters began circling the city after the explosion. I don't know what happened there, but a few ambulances and fire trucks drove to the left along the embankment. Details of what happened are not yet known. Judging by the footage from the scene, the house was blown up and then the debris burned down. It was also reported that in Mariupol, the invaders were preparing for the offensive of the Ukrainian armed forces. The close distance of Mariupol, one of Ukraine's most important gateways to the Black Sea with Russia's illegally annexed Crimea, draws attention. The city of Mariupol, which has a coast on the Sea of Azov, has been one of the hottest spots of conflict since the beginning of the war. One of the most concentrated targets of the Russian army is Mariupol on the Black Sea coast. Ukrainian forces defended Mariupol for days as the city fell into ruins, where Russian troops used heavy weapons. Mariupol is of strategic and economic importance due to its geographical location. Mariupol, one of the largest cities in the Donetsk region, has the largest and most equipped port of the Sea of Azov. The deep docks in the port provide important opportunities for shipping. The capacity of other Russian ports in the Sea of Azov is limited when compared to this port. Recently, 2 more generals of the Russian army were eliminated on the Eastern Front. Soldiers of the 24th Separate Assault Battalion either successfully attacked the Russian positions. Ukrainian commander Anatoly Shtyfin reported that they deleted the positions of the 2nd Corps's 4th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade of the Russian forces from the map. As a result of the attack, about 20 invaders, including the Russian brigade commander and chief of staff and one of his assistants, were destroyed. Images containing the combat work of the battalion were published in the Telegram group. According to the topography, the battle took place between the settlements of Ivanovskaya and Kishka. Kishka is located 5 kilometers south of Bakhmut. The village covered both the approach to the city and the route from Kostyantinivka, which fed the Ukrainian garrison. It was also reported that Ukraine eliminated 1 more Russian major general. According to reports, Major General Sergei Goryachev was killed in combat in the Zaporizhzhia region on Monday, June 12. According to Russian sources, the Ukrainian counterattack wiped out Major General Sergei Goryachev. A pro-Kremlin writer posted on social media that a 52-year-old man was killed in a Ukrainian attack in the Zaporizhzhia region. Major General Sergei Goryachev, chief of staff of the 35th United Arms Army, was killed as a result of an enemy missile attack. Major General Sergei Goryachev was a Russian career soldier. With the start of the large-scale invasion of Russia last year, he was promoted to Major General and became commander of the 5th Separate Tank Brigade. Thus, since the start of the Ukrainian counter-offensive, 7 Russian top commanders and generals have been sent on their eternal journey with a Ukrainian salute. General Christopher Cavoli, NATO's commander of joint forces in Europe, reported that more than 200,000 Russian soldiers and more than 1,800 officers have been killed or wounded since the start of the large-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The scale of this war is incredible. According to him, the Russian Federation has already lost more than 2,000 tanks in the war. The commander of the NATO joint forces in Europe said that after Russia attacked Ukraine, NATO must adapt to the new reality. If someone comes with a tank, you should have a tank too. But one of the lessons of the Cold War is that it's the accuracy of the weapons that counts. In addition, the production capacity of the defense industry is also important. The one who can produce faster wins the battle. Ukrainian forces in Novo, Danilovka, Robertino, Mala, Tokmak, Wilovil, Palmakivka, they have had some success and are building a foothold in the positions taken. Russian troops concentrated their main efforts on defense. The Russians are trying to block the advance of the Ukrainian troops. The invaders are using the reserves to recapture the lost position. In addition, Ukrainian soldiers continue to stop the offensive of Russian troops in the direction of Lyman and Bakhmut. At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces partially succeeded in the Luhansk region. Fierce clashes continue in the direction of Lyman, especially in the Yanpolivka and Serebryansk forest areas in the Donetsk region. Offensive actions were carried out in the Belogorov-Kashipka direction. They were partially successful. The lines reached were reinforced. Recall that in early June, Ukrainian troops stepped up offensive operations in the Zaporizhia region. The armed forces of Ukraine managed to liberate 8 settlements in the Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions. In addition, the Ukrainian defenders are also successful on the flanks in the direction of Bakhmut. In recent days, the Russian invaders gained speed in the direction of Lyman-Kupiansk, but the Ukrainian defenders successfully repel enemy attacks. On the other hand, Russian invaders are preparing a large-scale evacuation in Henichesk-Kherson region, which is temporarily occupied. In other words, while the Ukrainian army is advancing, the Russian army is preparing to flee from the occupied territories. On the other hand, propagandist Olga Skabeva draws parallels between the attacks. Concerns increased, especially after the attack on the Chongar Bridge until June 23. The Russian army had 2 logistics centers, Armyansk and Chongar, from which the invaders could withdraw from the south of Ukraine to the Crimea. However, a bombing occurred in Chongar. It is now clear that Armyansk will not be able to cope with the passage of the entire group of Russian troops during the retreat. Even more dangerous is the retreat through Mariupol. The armed forces of Ukraine are already reaching the occupied city Skabeva. We also recall that the armed forces of Ukraine began the Kherson operation. Then they hit the Antonovsky Bridge. Theoretically, such actions of Kiev should prompt an immediate response. The previous day, Shoigu warned of the bombing. There will be strikes against what he calls decision-making centers in Ukraine outside the region, including Crimea. It was previously reported that the attack on the Chongar bridges closed 70% of all military and civilian traffic of the Russian Federation to the Zaporizhia and Kherson fronts. In addition, about 80% of the Russian ammunition was transported from here. Later, a video of the results of the Bavona was posted on the web. Solovyov got angry on the air and said that he did not understand why Ukraine can destroy bridges that are so important to the Russian Federation, and the Russian army cannot do this. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, the Russian occupation army actively disseminates information about evacuation. Should the Ukrainian army pass, for example, in temporarily occupied Henichesk, collaborators receive SMS messages on their mobile phones containing the coordinates of the evacuation points and detailed instructions, causing panic. Such high casualty rates following attacks by Ukrainian forces also forced Russia to switch to more costly and dangerous tactics, such as using helicopters. The Russians are trying to compensate for their heavy artillery losses with this. However, this tactic of the Russians risks turning into a serious problem for Moscow in a short time. The Russian command does not have time to compensate for the loss of artillery, even by replacing the old Soviet howitzers. What is the most important purpose of a human being? Philosophers debated this question for centuries. Only after the development of science and psychology did it become clear that there is a definitive answer to this question. The first goal of every human being is to survive. For this, security is the first priority. Everything else comes after that. This is also true for soldiers faced with a great risk of death in war. Soldiers care very much about survival. No soldier wants to die. But what happens when soldiers realize they cannot win this war and that they will eventually die? Russian soldiers are now realizing this in Ukraine. This is leading to a disintegration of the Russian army. Russian soldiers have started to surrender to the Ukrainian army. Ukrainian Defense Ministry made a very important statement about the surrendered Russian soldiers. We investigate this problem in the Russian army. Let's start if you're ready. First of all, it is a fact that the soldiers in the Russian army are experiencing great fear. Russian soldiers are suffering a very heavy defeat in Ukraine. This is destroying the psychology of Russian soldiers. Kremlin was constantly spreading propaganda before this war started. Russian soldiers who followed the Kremlin statements thought that this war would be very easy. They thought that the Ukrainian people would show love to the Russian soldiers and that the Ukrainian army would surrender. But the Ukrainian army surprised them. The Ukrainian army showed a historic resistance and inflicted a great defeat on the Russian army. The Russian army suffered heavy losses on all fronts, especially in the Bakhmut region, became a grave for the Russian army. Russian troops were tasted with occupying this region. However, as a result of the resistance of the Ukrainian army, the Russian army suffered a very heavy defeat. Russian soldiers wanted to withdraw from this region. However, Putin had given orders to this region must be captured. Therefore, the Russian army continued its operations. However, all operations resulted in the deaths of many Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers began to think that their friends had died in vain. They realized that if the fighting in this area continued, thousands of Russian soldiers would die. So they tried to put pressure on their commanders. Russian soldiers who wanted to retreat were punished very harshly by their commanders. As a result, the tension between the Russian commanders and the soldiers increased even more. Russian soldiers stopped following their commanders' orders. Problem of indiscipline in the Russian army increased even more, but the Russian soldiers felt that something had to be done. Meanwhile, a new topic was being discussed in the Russian army. The project I Want to Live, launched by the Ukrainian government, was a great hope of salvation for thousands of Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers who wanted to surrender applied to this project. That's what the soldiers in the Bakhmut region did. Russian soldiers who contacted Ukraine made a secret plan to surrender safely. Osenga Daily News Team, we do not find Trillionite to disclose the secret plan. Therefore, we are not sharing information on this issue until the war is over. Russian soldiers had a special plan to surrender. All Russian soldiers planned to surrender on different days. The Ukrainian government created a safe corridor for Russian soldiers to surrender. Hundreds of Russian soldiers surrendered to the Ukrainian army within 2 weeks. Vitaly Matvienko, spokesperson for the I Want to Live hotline, said registered callers from Russian soldiers to surrender doubled the last month to 3,000 calls. Ukrainian Defense Ministry has also said that there has been a sharp increase in the surrender of Russian soldiers. Many Ukrainian analysts say that these numbers will increase further. According to experts, most of the Russian soldiers surrendering are now doing it out of fear of a Ukrainian military operation. The news that the Ukrainian army is about to launch a major operation is scaring Russian soldiers. However, experts believe that this number will increase even more. Thousands more Russian soldiers are expected to surrender when the Ukrainian army actually launches a major offensive. Vitaly Matvienko, spokesperson for the I Want to Live hotline, said registered callers from Russian soldiers to surrender double last month to 3,000 calls. The large number of soldiers surrendering in the Russian army makes Putin very angry because the number of soldiers in the Russian army is rapidly decreasing. Every day, hundreds of Russian soldiers die or surrender to the Ukrainian army. As a result, the number of soldiers in the Russian army is becoming insufficient. Putin needs more soldiers to win this war, but Putin has no more troops to send to Ukraine. As you know, Putin had earlier announced Russian President Vladimir Putin is forced to tear up the pages of his plans when every plan he has made for the Ukraine war has failed. The course of the war was determined by the Russian army in the first days, and the advances of the Russian army drew the logbook of the war. However, after this short-term advance, successive unsuccessful attempts of the Russian army pushed them to take a defensive position and then retreat. The fate of the war these days is clearly determined by the actions of the armed forces of Ukraine. In Zaporizhia, the Ukrainian armed forces continued to advance quietly and overshadow critical areas in Mariupol, even though the attacks of the Russian army have increased in Bakhmut, especially in Solidar. They cannot break through the incredible defensive wall of the Ukrainian armed forces, and the Russian casualties are increasing day by day. New breakings are happening in Kherson too. However, the region with the most activity in recent days stands out as the Crimea. Attacks on Crimea by the armed forces of Ukraine are being carried out one after another. Crimea will definitely be the breaking point of this war, and these explosions definitely mean something, especially in recent days. The Ukrainian armed forces have been attacking with unmanned aerial vehicles, and Russian air defense systems are trying to prevent these attacks. However, it would not be correct to say that the Russian air defense systems have been able to cope with this very well. So far, in the reports published today, it was reported that explosions occurred one after another in Crimea. The explosions were reported to have occurred in the afternoon of January 10th. According to local residents, tail traces from anti-aircraft guided missiles are visible in the sky, which may indicate that the cause of the explosions was a reflection of another attack from Ukraine. So far, there is no official statement on this from the Russian-backed authorities of the Crimean Peninsula, but video footage taken by local residents shows that Russia may indeed be the result of the work of its air defense systems. At the moment, it's not possible to determine exactly what the Russian anti-aircraft guided missiles hit. The occurrence of explosions could mean a successful Ukrainian airstrike. Russian air defense systems cannot reach the Roswell's Kiev part of the peninsula. It is noteworthy that shortly before the explosions, Sevastopol Governor Mikhail Vosiv could hear the sounds of the applause from the residents of the city, training from the Russian army. But it's not specified whether this was caused by the thunderous explosions. However, before this attack in the afternoon, we saw Ukrainian drones paint Sevastopol red. Ukraine launched a new attack on Crimea about 44 hours before the last attack. At around 3 a.m. in the morning, 2 violent explosions occurred in the Sevastopol region. According to published reports, the Russian air defense system shot down a drone over the North Pier. The source of the second explosion is unknown. This was the second wave of attacks reported by Crimea in the last 3 days. Previously, 4 drone attacks and explosions were reported between January 1st and January 6th, as well as between December 20th and 31st of last year. Explosions and drone attacks were reported 4 times in the skies of Crimea. As a result, there has been an explosion in Crimea for 10 days of the last 20 days. If you remember, historical attacks were carried out on the navy and military facilities of the invading Russians in Crimea in August and November. The most recent large-scale attack was in the port of Sevastopol by Ukrainian drone armies in November and damaged 3 ships, including the Admiral Makarov of the Russian Navy's Black Sea Fleet. The meaning of these successive attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces is clear. The Ukrainians want to surround the peninsula from 2 directions in order to open an corridor to the Crimea and to liberate the peninsula, which was unjustly annexed by Russia in 2014 with a major land operation for this land corridor. Mariupol and Kherson must be completely liberated for this. The armed forces of Ukraine regularly destroy Russian air defense systems, ammunition depots, and military installations in Mariupol and Kherson. If you remember, the Ukrainian armed forces used the same strategy. When the first part of Kherson was liberated, Ukraine began to clearly show the basis of its attack on Crimea. This thesis also received support from the USA. The United States has declared that the armed forces of Ukraine are ready to attack the Crimea. The American general, Ben Hodges, said that the Ukrainian troops had enough weapons to begin the attack on the Crimea. The main problem for Kiev is simply the lack of direct access to the peninsula. But according to Hodges, the situation can change significantly during the summer months. According to Ben Hodges, having taken control of the right bank of the Kherson region, the Ukrainian armed forces actually began to control the main approach to the Crimea. In his opinion, if the armed forces of Ukraine attempted an offensive in the Zaporizhia region, the armament of the armed forces of Ukraine would be sufficient to fully control the logistics of the peninsula and the Kherson region. Hodges states that the recent undermining of the bridge in Mariupol and the attacks by HIMARS systems in this area are evidence that the Ukrainian forces are trying to destroy existing logistical targets, thereby minimizing the supply of Russian troops. On the other hand, the Russian army repulsed the air defense attacks quite successfully, and during a recent offensive, the Ukrainian armed forces were driven from the settlement, leaving Kiev. Doroshenko is less likely to take any action. When we examine each of these attacks on the map, it can create entrance straight to the Crimea via Mariupol and Kherson. If this military strait reaches Armyansk, it may be too late for everything for the Russian army. At the same time, the capture of Mariupol by the Ukrainian armed forces will strategically threaten the Myzor and Peremesyna regions of Crimea given the course of the war. These difficulties, combined with Ukraine's ardent defensive effort backed by Western military assistance, allowed Ukraine to retake thousands of miles of territory it had previously occupied and turn the tide of the war in its favor. Crimea is a territory that Russia annexed from Ukraine in 2014 and has been controlled by Moscow ever since, but remains a major point of contention between the two Eastern European countries. Ukrainian leaders have said that they hope to restore control of Crimea in any possible negotiations to end the war. Of course, time is on Ukraine's side. There are no manpower issues and their logistical situation is getting better every week. Not a single Russian soldier actually wants to be there, and the sanctions hurt. Ukraine can liberate Crimea by the end of August. At the same time, optimism about Ukraine's chances of retaking Crimea could be boosted by continued shifts in the army. The West does not provide assault weapons to its army, and they are now trained at large troop levels. The Ministry of Defense announced last month that it plans to train Ukrainian troops in combined armed maneuvering, which it describes as what makes Western armies so good. If they learn to do the combined arms maneuver on this scale, they certainly can. They will be able to act at the same time and fully extinguish the fires with Western intelligence. They will have better situational awareness and better morale. Still, we know that the fight to recapture Crimea will be brutal as Russia has built strong defenses there. We should also say that Crimea should be Ukraine's last target because of the risk of failure. In other words, after the Russian army is completely dispersed at the front, it will be much more accurate to carry out a ground operation after the Crimean defense is broken by airstrikes. Kiev carried out a similar attack west of Kherson. For this reason, they saw how successful an operation could be. They also know that they can perform this type of operation. They should be mindful that as the war drags on, Ukraine will risk losing more soldiers, and Western supplies may dry up as some members oppose the Ukrainian side. If Ukrainian military leaders make the wrong choice and lose equipment, the war will definitely be resolved in this region and everything will be over the day that the Crimean War is concluded. Because Crimea is so critical, every explosion and attack must be carefully scrutinized. The conventional effects of the critical war between Ukraine and Russia are now emerging from the ground conflict zone within the strategic borders of the Eastern European bloc. The effects of the war began to spread to many important locations and began to embrace the Black Sea and the Crimea. Leading actors in this strategic area, such as Bulgaria, Georgia, Ukraine, Turkey, and Romania, are of great importance in terms of influencing the course of the Black Sea and preventing Russia from spreading danger from Crimea. In particular, the presence of NATO members Bulgaria, Turkey, and Romania's navies in the Black Sea is critical for the alliance. The Black Sea policies of these countries towards the war between Ukraine and Russia depend entirely on the attitude of the Moscow administration, especially the measures taken by NATO members in the Black Sea against Putin's navy are very remarkable. Romania and Turkey are both strengthening the Ukrainian navy and adding submarines and aircraft carriers to their navies, undermining Russian dominance in the Black Sea. The technical support of the US, French, and Spanish navies to their Black Sea allies and the critical moves of Turkey and Romania to strengthen their Black Sea navies are dealing a powerful blow to Putin's Black Sea dreams. If you remember, the Russian armed forces carried out large missile attacks, 71 of them on the territory of Ukraine. One of the caliber cruise missiles launched by the Russian Navy at Ukraine entered Romanian airspace. As a result of this situation, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, General Valery Zaluzhny, reported that 2 people were killed. Following the striking situation, Romania signaled that it would directly increase its security measures in the Black Sea against the possible danger posed by Russia within the scope, namely for a much safer Black Sea. The Romanian Ministry of Defense requested approval from the country's parliament to purchase submarines for the Black Sea Fleet. Currently, the Romanian Ministry of Defense has already begun work to initiate procedures for the coordination of various funding programs in the interests of the Navy of his country. However, this demand decision from the Romanian parliament was officially the clearest proof that the Romanian Ministry of Defense took a striking step for the Black Sea. The demands set out in the document include the purchase of minesweepers and submarines and the modernization of missile carriers currently in Romanian Navy service. The type and number of submarines planned to be purchased and the estimated purchase amount were not specified. Currently, Romania has no operational submarines. The last Romanian submarine Delfinul has not sailed since 1996, but Romania is looking forward to launching a brand new submarine in the cool waters of the Black Sea. With this critical work. In fact, last year, Romania signed a memorandum of intent with France to purchase 2 French Scorpion 2000 submarines. The estimated value of the purchase was approximately 500 million euros. The Scorpion is a next-generation type of diesel-electric attack submarine manufactured by the French naval group in collaboration with the Spanish company Navantia. In other words, this vehicle was, of course, in a style that would work for Romania, because today 14 submarines of this type are already in use or under construction by various countries. The Chilean Navy and the Malaysian Navy will each have 2 submarines of this type. The Brazilian Navy, on the other hand, will have 4 ranks and India will have the largest fleet. Besides these countries, Romania will have created a submarine power in the Black Sea. Russia was astonished at Romania's creation of a strong navy in this regard. In fact, the reaction of the Russians is quite normal. This is because Russia is currently pressed politically, diplomatically, and in many other ways by many countries not only on the territory of Ukraine, but also on the Black Sea side. But as we mentioned, the final blow to the Russians came from Romania, which has a coast on the Black Sea. It's not known whether the French Scorpion 2000 submarine that Romania will buy will affect the course of the war as much as Russia is worried about. But the fact that Russia is losing its power in the Black Sea with each passing day is seen as the biggest nightmare of the Moscow authorities. For this reason, Romania's inclusion of the Scorpene submarine in its naval power will reinforce this great nightmare of the Russians. Let's take a closer look at the French Scorpene 2000 submarine, which will be Romania's new naval power in the Black Sea. It is worth noting that the lengths of these submarines range from 60 to 70 meters. The width of the submarine is 8 meters. Due to the high degree of automation, the submarine crew consists of only 31 people. This team usually includes 6 officers and 25 foremen and soldiers. There are also 6 additional places inside the submarine with folding beds for cadets or paratroopers. On the other hand, for the daily management of the submarine that Romania plans to launch into the cool waters of the Black Sea, it is sufficient for 9 people to stand guard. Available materials give the boat up to 70 days of autonomy. In addition, the armament of the Scorpene includes 6 533mm torpedo tubes, the design of which complies with the Stanig 4405 standard. These weapons can be very diverse and are determined by a particular customer. The torpedo ammunition and Scorpene includes a total of 18 different weapons and military ammunition. These figures, in fact, highlight that the Scorpene submarine is a fully armored underwater rocket in amphibious and defense issues. In other words, when Romania landed the submarine in the Black Sea, it is estimated that there will be big changes in the general course because the countries working to make the Black Sea much safer are not limited to Romania. Turkey, known as Ukraine's brave ally, is constantly on the alert against Russian presence in the Black Sea and the threats it may pose in the future. Turkey's move on the security of the Black Sea is a critical strategy that even the USA could not predict. Amid rising regional tensions as war rages in Ukraine on the other side of the Black Sea, Turkey launched its first amphibious assault ship to expand its drone capabilities to land-to-sea operations. TCG Anadolu can only serve light aircraft, especially helicopters and jets that can take off from shorter runways. In addition, this 232-meter long and 32-meter wide frigate can carry around 1,400 personnel, a battalion of soldiers, combat vehicles, and support units for overseas operations. In his speech at the opening ceremony of the ship held in Istanbul, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan stated that TCG Anadolu can carry out military and humanitarian operations in every part of the world when needed. Erdogan sees this ship as a symbol that will reinforce Turkey's regional leadership position. But there is one more important detail in this regard. The Turkish TCG Anadolu aircraft carrier will be one of the important elements that will protect the Black Sea from Russian naval threats after Romania's submarine move. TCG Anadolu amphibious assault aircraft carrier was built by the Turkish-Spanish consortium at Istanbul Sedef shipyard, according to the design of the Spanish light aircraft carrier Juan Carlos I. In addition to helicopters, Turkey plans to deploy the new carrier Bayraktar TB3 and Kizilelm unmanned aerial combat vehicles, both manufactured by the Turkish defense firm Baker, as well as the Hijet light attack aircraft developed by Turkish Aerospace Industries. When the plan comes to fruition, TCG Anadolu will be the world's first aircraft carrier whose fleet consists of mostly armed unmanned aerial vehicles. This situation shows that Turkey will represent a first in the world in the Ukraine war that's been going on for nearly 14 months. Turkey has positioned itself as an intermediary between Kiev and Moscow, helping to conclude an agreement that would allow the safe export of grain from Ukrainian ports via the Black Sea. But the TCG Anadolu move reminded us that Turkey is exactly a brave ally of Ukraine because Hulusi Akar, Minister of National Defense of Turkey, stated that TCG Anadolu will cruise in the Black Sea with the support of the Air Force after the public's visit. Those who wish will be able to tour and see TCG Anadolu. Afterwards, this ship will cruise towards the Black Sea with the support of the Turkish Air Force. In this way, those who do not see the power of the Turkish armed forces will see and hear. In summary, with these critical moves by Turkey and Romania, Russia will be much more stuck in the Black Sea. Ukraine, on the other hand, will have much better opportunities to recapture the Crimean Peninsula in the Black Sea by being much more isolated from the danger of the Russian Navy.